Welcome to the MLL conference. This is session 2, the TESOL M.A panel. We will be hearing today from our panelists. First panelist being Keylyn Wallis-Jeffrey, who will be presenting the effect of intrinsic motivation on vocabulary, followed by Jaimie Wu and Heekyung Lee, who will be presenting development and pilot testing of a reading and writing diagnostic test for Kazakhstan university students. So we will begin with Keylyn. The way it'll work is we will do approximately 15 minutes of presentation, followed by a short Q&A session. So if anybody has questions, go ahead and submit them in the chat box, and we will be able to deliver them to the presenter. All right, Keylyn, the platform is yours.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Rueckert, for having this MLL conference, and hopefully we get some attendees. Okay, so here's my slideshow. So hello, so I am Keylyn Wallis-Jeffrey, and I'm presenting on intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation and their effect on vocabulary. So my preliminary research question is, do extrinsic motivators decrease the amount of vocabulary that language learners know? And at this point, I was planning on asking, so does anyone know what extrinsic motivators and extrinsic motivators are?
Yes, I think we do on there. Intrinsic motivators being kind of self-motivational, while extrinsic motivators are doing it for a reward or punishment in most instances.
Yes. And Heekyung, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, good. So extrinsic motivation is motivation that is obtained from external factors such as rewards, punishments, consequences. And intrinsic motivation is motivation that is obtained from within an activity that is being done. So an extrinsic motivator is a reason to do something that is self-rewarding in and of itself, whereas an extrinsic motivator is an external desire that is divorced from the work being done to achieve it. For example, one may be intrinsically motivated to read the newspaper because they feel it will help them stay informed about current events, whereas someone else might be extrinsically motivated to read a chapter about the same topic from a history textbook in order to pass an exam. So there's metacognitive lessons to improve vocabulary. There's this one study that was done by Rawan Asharif, in which 116 Saudi women took vocabulary tests. Some of the women learned vocabulary from a cognitive strategy in which they learned simply by just writing down new words for future practice during instruction. And then there's another group that took a metacognitive lesson, like, those lessons that have a lot of steps to them. And these engage the students in actively thinking about each activity that involved a new vocabulary. So the students who learned from the metacognitive study scored 0.8 standard deviations higher than the group who learned from the cognitive strategy. So the results show that similarly, students learn more vocabulary when they are motivated by pedagogical strategies that are conducive to intrinsic motivation. So they're not just writing things down basically because they need to, they're engaging with each other. And as you can see, 0.8 standard deviations is quite a big difference when you consider each standard deviation. There's more difference between the data. And then there was this one study about just 70 learners, a study conducted by Lee. A group of 70 Chinese English learners were split into two groups of 35. The control group was given vocabulary exams using conventional vocabulary lists, and the experimental group was given a game-based vocabulary learning app. The results showed that students who took the game-based vocabulary learning app scored much higher in vocabulary achievement motivation, self-confidence, and they achieved more in motivation and self-confidence than the control group. So this shows that when students find the content of the lessons intrinsically motivating, they excel in learning much better than without such motivation. There was another study done with whiteboards. So there are many ideas that teachers can implement to induce a learning environment in which students are more intrinsically oriented. So when a group of researchers in Indonesia were studying better techniques in vocabulary classrooms, they conducted this study in which the efficacy of whiteboards was tested. The experimental group was given whiteboard animations for the teacher to use while instructing the vocabulary lessons, rather than just nothing being put up on the board. So the control group was given whiteboard animations and the vocabulary lessons were taught without them. The study found that 58.9% more vocabulary was learned by the experimental group that used the whiteboard animations. This shows that animations help students learn vocabulary. It might be that animations help students properly receive the schemata of the vocabulary being taught. In addition to this, animations make learning more enjoyable, as animations are more entertaining than pictures, definitions, and translations. So a follow-up study would be beneficial in which the control group consists of students who learn vocabulary from groups of animations in the class that had given low ratings prior to the lessons, and an experimental group that consists of students who learn vocabulary from groups of animations that the class had given high ratings prior to the lessons. For example, if the student gives stick figures low ratings and SpongeBob figures high ratings, then the experimental group would learn from the stick figure animations and the control group would learn from the SpongeBob animations. And we would see if the SpongeBob animations would increase the amount of vocabulary that they learn. Also, learning vocabulary is learned best without force. So while students learn from explicit learning during class time instruction, additional learning that advances each student in their acquisition of vocabulary can be gained from inductive learning. So a classroom that is conducive to intrinsically oriented students and does not use extrinsic motivators increases the amount of inductive learning that occurs outside of class. So according to Diane Smith, a fifth of new words that a learner is exposed to are learned via incidental vocabulary learning when done properly. When not done properly, when the reading is sparse and the students are not particularly motivated, this figure drops to 1/12. In order for vast sums of vocabulary to be acquired by our students, they must both have decent lessons in the classroom and be encouraged to dedicate time outside of the classroom to acquire vocabulary. So we want to induce these situations in which students learn inductively and not just being taught. Like you want learning to be as accidental as possible, and that requires students to be motivated to learn. So in conclusion, much research is needed regarding extrinsic motivators and their effects on students. Vocabulary tests would be very beneficial in testing if students are learning well from any particular learning environment. I would propose gathering a large group of students who are each scheduled to enroll in a semester of vocabulary lessons and divide them into control groups and experimental groups. The experimental groups would receive instruction that has a lot of extrinsic motivators, and each group should be subject to different kinds of extrinsic motivations, such as candies for giving right answers and prizes for giving decent scores, The control group would get a gamified course, or actually like a gamified course that is designed to be as conducive to intrinsic motivation as possible. Over the course of the semester, students should be given various exams that test their vocabulary. A year after the semester had passed, the students should be gathered to take the exams again. If the control group scores significantly higher than the experimental groups, we will have empirical evidence that intrinsic motivation indeed improves language skills of students in the field of second language acquisition. The field of SLA needs more studies, such as the aforementioned hypothetical study, for us to grasp a better understanding of the results of different levels of motivation in the classrooms. Okay, so thank you. And now I have my discussion questions. So, what are some limitations of the studies done on vocabulary and intrinsic motivation?
And we do have two attendees, Aubrey and Misha are attending. If you have questions, they're not able to respond vocally, but they can put it in the chat. So Aubrey and Misha, if you have comments or questions, please go ahead and put it there. Otherwise, Jaimie and Heekyung, you can respond verbally because you're also co-panelists.
Okay. Yeah, and I cannot see the other two attendees. I can only see the participants, which are 4, but then it has in parentheses 6.
Yeah, and that's where in this webinar setting like this, attendees, we see the list of them. However, they have limited participation. The cameras won't work on it, the voice won't work, but they can comment in the chat for us. That should be available. I think you hit one of the limitations that I always find on the intrinsic motivation. Well, lots of the motivation studies I find are not longitudinal. So I like that you put in your design that there would be a revisiting, see how well they've retained the vocabulary. Because I feel like oftentimes people come up with a really cool intervention that does get people's attention, motivates them initially, but would that work over time? Does it have lasting value is always what I kind of wonder, or if it is just a result of, that was cool, that was kind of a fun experience that we went through, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was like looking for like different studies that would show like something long term, like and they would just give me like these like vague things about, you know, the scores that they got. But I'm thinking, okay, well, how do I know that they really retained that if it's only like, okay, so here you practiced, this group practiced on a whiteboard, this group didn't, this one learned more vocabulary, but then, okay, well, did they retain that vocabulary a year later, or what happened after that?
Yeah, I feel like that's just really a lacking part in the research. It's really hard to find good studies that continue to show if it worked longer term, you know?
Okay. And is that Misha or Mashia?
Oh, there's a Q&A. There we go.
Yeah.
Misha, I believe.
Okay. So Misha asks, do you think if teachers were able to have more resources available in the classroom, such as the whiteboard animations, this could be put into practice more to prove this hypothesis? So if they had more resources available in the classroom, yeah, that could be used if we had like maybe a classroom where whiteboard animations were available to a group of students, maybe in some school districts, and maybe there's some school districts where teachers don't. We could do a study in which we study the teachers who have those resources and the teachers who also don't. Although there might be other variables that might interfere with that study, like maybe schools with a higher income, like schools that receive more resources from the government, might have other resources available other than just whiteboards. And that can also affect the students' motivation, the students' mental health, the students, students who are in poverty might have, they might be struggling more. So I would be concerned about the other variables that affect those schools if they receive more funding that will help them have these animations on the whiteboard. So I think that we should do this experiment in like a setting in which all the other variables are the same. Like the students should be of the same age range, of the same mental capacities, of the same like English level. And that way we're only focusing on one variable. Yes, and Dr. Rueckert, do you have any ideas about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that resources are always key. The tricky part is I think a lot of these resources are available. It's just, do we know how to access them, and do we have the time to develop them? Like the whiteboard animations, you could use a program called Powtoon that will, it's free and available to create these whiteboard animation presentations. It takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of learning. You need to know that it's available on there. So sometimes it is simply, do teachers know what's available, and do they have the training to be able to use some of the technologies that are available to them, right?
Okay, good. And my next question, what would be a good way to test the hypothesis that students acquire more vocabulary if they receive intrinsically oriented education? Jaimie?
Maybe through speaking, like free speech or essay writing, so you could see students' range of vocabulary use and what they produce.
So like that you test their range of vocabulary and what they produce, like in which setting?
I suppose it depends on the hypothesis. So for example, if your hypothesis is testing for vocabulary use in a classroom setting, then perhaps essay writing. If it's more of a social setting, then perhaps free speech.
Yeah. Yeah, we can have essays that would test their vocabulary. We could have like speaking lessons that would test their vocabulary. But I'm asking about like what kind of studies could be done. Like we studied with we had a study with whiteboards. We had a study with like a game-based app. We had studies with those cards that they just wrote on as compared to metacognitive studies. I'm sorry, using the metacognitive approach to learning. So what would be another study that you would propose that would help us study like whether or not learning vocabulary from a lesson without extrinsic motivators improves their vocabulary?
I think possibly giving choice as far as reading of materials, vocabulary that could be learned, might give them the opportunity to choose what they're more intrinsically motivated to learn. So they could have article, it could be a reading, but you have 5 choices of the readings, and you might have 5 different vocabulary lists depending on those readings. If they have the choice, it's going to be more intrinsically motivated. They're not getting, any reward necessarily for it. They're just getting a different task. So I think something like that might be able to say, hey, are they retaining it better than if we are doing like an assigned reading that it may not be as intrinsically motivated to care about that vocabulary, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's a good example. I would also say that we could do that with listening and speaking as well. We could have one group watch a video and then write about the vocabulary they learned from it. And then we can have another group speak about the vocabulary that they learned from it. And then we can have another group that chooses a list of 10 videos and like each student can choose a different video, and then they will speak about the vocabulary that they learned from that video and learn from that video. So yeah, so if the students learn more from when they choose their article or their video to learn from, and then that will show that, yeah, that intrinsically oriented learning will improve their vocabulary.
Well, thank you very much, Keylyn. I think we're about at time, so we're going to switch over to our next presenters. But thank you very much, Keylyn. Appreciate this discussion on here. Let's proceed with Jaimie Wu and Heekyung Lee. So the time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rueckert. Hello, everybody. My name is Heekyung Lee.
Hi, my name is Jaimie Wu.
As introduced, we're going to talk about development and pilot testing of reading and writing diagnosis tests for Kazakhstan University students. So first, the context of our test was college course in Kazakhstan University, and the purpose of our test was diagnostic and proficiency test. So we wanted to get a better understanding of students' English proficiency and their strengths and weaknesses in reading and writing skills. And the result of this test could be used to help the instructor gain insight into making future teaching plans. And for the interpretive framework, our test was criterion reference test because our focus was not making comparison between students. For the next, our construct was reading and writing. For reading, we focused on reading for the main idea, purpose, reading for details, guessing the meaning of unfamiliar vocabulary from context. For writing, we included grammar, organization and cohesion, vocabulary, and content. So for our first TLU domain, it is EFL academic, where students get to read diverse passages and answer questions regarding main idea, purpose, details, vocabulary, and they get to write an opinion paragraph. Our second TLU domain is business English. And in this domain, students need to read and understand job postings, respond to recruiters, including self-introduction, and explain their qualifications. So for the characteristics of our test takers, they are all college students in Kazakhstan University, and their L1 is either Kazakh or Russian. Their ages are around 17 to 21, and their English proficiency ranges from A2 to B1 plus based on CFR. They are taking a course called 2 foreign languages, which means they want to be an English teacher or a translator.
So here we have the qualities of usefulness and our minimum targets for each one. When deciding, we kept in mind that maximizing one quality leads to the virtual loss of others. Reliability was of moderately high importance and was set at 0.7. Construct validity was of moderately high importance. Authenticity was of moderate importance, and impact was of moderately high importance. So here are the sections for our two test sections, or here are the contents of our two test sections. In the reading section, we have 14 multiple choice questions, 2 multiple choice, multiple response, and 5 fill in the blank. The number of questions per construct component is 2 for main idea, 15 for details, 4 for vocabulary and context. In the writing section, we have 2 extended response questions. One prompt is an email response to a job posting, and the other prompt is an opinion paragraph. 4 components are assessed in this section, and these include grammar, organization and cohesion, vocabulary, and content. Here are some sample items from our reading section. And here are our 2 writing prompts from our writing section. So regarding scoring, the reading section had 21 dichotomous items. Each item was equally weighted at 1 point. We used Excel to calculate the scores and reviewed it. The writing section had 2 polytomous items. We made 2 analytic rubrics, one for each prompt. On the right side of the slide is a showcase of our rubric for the job response prompt. The other rubric was very similar to this, but modified slightly to better fit the nature of the task, which was an opinion paragraph. Our rubrics contain 4 constructs and the rating scales are from 0 to 3.
So for our pilot test, the test was conducted in Kazakhstan and 38 college students participated. The test format was online testing and we used Qualtrics. For the testing process, the test link was sent to the instructor with detailed instruction. And then the test was conducted during their class time between November 12th through 17th, 2022, depending on the class the students were in. And the students were informed that the test was to measure their English proficiency and identify their weaknesses and strengths. And the test result was sent to the instructor and students on November 24th. Qualtrics screen looked like this, and an example of test result looked like this, and it was sent to the student and instructor. So here's our reading and writing result. First, this is our descriptive for reading and writing. The mean of reading section was 56% correct, and the mean of writing section was 10.8 out of 24. And if you look at the scoonies and curtices, as you can see, it's not normal distribution. For reading, it's negatively skewed, and for writing, there was a lot of 0 scores, which is our biggest mistake in this pilot testing. So about this, we assume that students either did not have time to respond to the writing prompt, or they were not motivated enough to respond to all writing prompts, or they did not have enough writing skills to write paragraph level answers. And this is our descriptives for writing subscales. We can see that 4 subscales show pretty much similar patterns, and we can see these patterns on histograms as well. Next slide. Or 4 subscales show similar distribution, as you can see. For our reading cut score, we decided on 2 cut scores. The total score for reading section was 21, and cut scores are at 16 points and 11 points. They were determined by natural breakup score distribution, and also its cut score means that they got about 75% correct and 50% correct. For the dependability or accuracy of cut score classification, we calculated phi lambda. Phi lambda for cut score 16 was 0.82, which is quite dependable, but phi lambda for cut score 11 was around 0.7. So we could say that classification between A2 and A1 was less dependable than B1 and A2. For our writing cut score, we decided on 3 cut scores since our analytic rubric has 4 performance levels from 0 to 3 points for each category. Also, as we mentioned before, our test is based on CFR framework, so our rubric is also based on CFR levels. So based on our classification, students who got 22 or more are considered B1, and students who got between 14 and 21 are A2, and students who got less than 8 were considered A1. And here are our results for reliability for each section. Our alphas for reading and writing sections were higher than 0.8, which is good, and it is also higher than our target reliability, 0.7. For the reliability for each subscale of writing section, all the alphas are above 0.7, which is our target, and organization and cohesion category has the biggest alpha. Next is our inter-rater reliability. We had 3 raters, and as you can see, all the correlations between 2 raters are about 0.99, which is very surprising. About this, we thought that our quantitative descriptors in our scoring rubric had a positive impact on this. Also, we assumed that a lot of 0 scores also contributed to high correlation. So we did a little experiment. We excluded all the 0 scores and calculated inter-rater reliability again. But as you can see, we still had pretty high correlations, although it is less than previous values. So we concluded that quantitative descriptors had a positive impact on these high correlations. For the example of quantitative descriptors, we included something like students had 2 to 4 grammatical errors, or students wrote 1 to 2 qualifications, etc. So, all right. Next is our correlation for writing tasks. First, correlation between two writing tasks, which are email response and opinion paragraph, it is 0.699, which is almost 0.7. And correlation between subscales were very high, as you can see, and vocabulary and cohesion had the highest correlation. Now, moving on to item analysis, we're going to identify some problematic items here. First of all, for the rule of thumbs for discrimination indices, please look at the table. And please note that IF is only reported to assess interpretation, and it was not a criterion for item revision. So we calculated item fee for each cut score, and we detected a few problematic items. So aside from the borderline ones, item 2 and item 12 seem to have some problems. So based on these, we're going to look into some distractor analysis. So the shaded options indicate that response frequency is less than 10%, and point by zero is close to 0 or has non-trivial positive value. Looking into item 2 and 12, which were found to be problematic through item analysis. For item 2, option C is not working well. As you can see, correct answer A and wrong answer C were selected in a similar proportion. And for item 12, we don't see any problematic distractors, but we can see that only a small number of test takers picked the correct answer A.
So here are some suggestions for revisions for our reading section. First, we should include inferencing question. Our test originally included inferencing as a construct definition, but we removed the questions as they were deemed to be weak. To fix this, we will find another passage that will work better for inferencing so that we can include this in the construct definition. Adding inferencing will also improve our argument for authenticity since it's an important part of the academic TOU domain. Second, per the item and distractor analysis, items 2 and 12 needed revision. So here's a screenshot of item 2. Item 2 had an item B value of 0.033 at cut score 16 and 0.204 at cut score 11. Both of these are lower than the cutoff value of 0.3. The key was A, however, the point by serial value of A was at 0.256 and the point by serial value C was at 0.119, which again are both lower than the cutoff value of 0.3. This shows that C was also a popular option among students. What we would change to fix this is to replace thunder with a different word. Option C may have been confusing because thunder is semantically related to option A's electricity. So here's a screenshot of item 12. Item 12 had an item B value of 0.12 at cut score 16 and 0.015 at cut score 11. Both of these are lower than the cutoff value of 0.3. The key was A, however, the point by serial value of A was at 0.116, C at 0.028, and D at negative 0.054. So even though C had a positive point by serial, only 11% of students chose C, whereas D, although negative, had a 46% response frequency. Because the response frequency of C was much lower comparable to D, we decided to revise option D instead. We will rewrite D since popular tourist state in D may have seemed similar to famous for attractions in option A, and this may have confused students. For our writing section, what needed to be revised was our rubric. Our rubric subscale for grammar counted 0 to 2 grammar errors as a 3, which is the highest score. However, while we were grading, we found that students who displayed better writing skills earned lower scores for grammar due to the fact that they wrote more. To fix this, we removed the count for grammar errors and use overall comprehensibility as a qualifier instead. We will also provide writing tasks at the sentence level. So moving on to our assessment use argument. First, our overall reliability met and exceeded our expectation. The reliability target of this test was moderately high at 0.7, and as you can see, all of our Cronbach's alphas exceeded 0.7. Inter-rater reliability was also surprisingly high at 0.98, even after we removed the students that scored 0. Second, our target for construct validity was moderate. The reading section did not meet this target. We correlated the total scores of all the questions for passage 1 to the total scores of all the questions for passage 2. And both passages had items from all 3 reading construct definitions. The correlation was low at 0.51, despite both passages containing items that were supposed to test the same constructs. The writing section also did not meet this target. The correlation between the 2 writing prompts was low at 0.47, despite both prompts testing the same constructs, albeit with slightly different descriptors due to the nature of the task. There were many students who did not answer the writing prompts or gave short answers ranging from 1 word to 1 sentence and thus received 0 points. The test failed to measure the writing skills of these students because a score of 0 cannot imply that these test takers had no writing skills. We should have provided writing tests at the sentence level considering the level of the students. The correlation between reading and writing was at 0.48. This is satisfactory because this shows that reading and writing were not completely testing the same constructs. Third, our target for authenticity was moderate. Although there is the limitation that we do not directly teach the test takers, we try to provide test tasks that would be closely related to their learning activities by considering their TLU domain as much as possible. So regarding the input of the tests, 1 of 2 reading passages and 1 of 2 writing prompts were adapted from real-world material. We also use English vocabulary profile to ensure that the vocabulary in the passages were appropriate for A2 to B1 level test takers. The test tasks resemble tasks in the academic TLU domain. Reading for main idea / purpose, reading for details, and guessing the meaning of a word through context are tasks that occur in this domain. However, because half of the reading questions are multiple choice, it would be difficult to consider this test highly authentic. Therefore, we tried to offset this through the writing section. Writing an email response and/or opinion paragraph are tasks that students may actually do in the business and academic TLU domain. As a result, we believe that we have attained a test quality above the moderate level in terms of authenticity. So next, our target for impact was moderately high. The impact of the test was satisfactory because after testing, we provided the instructor with each student's scores and percentiles for each section of the test, and provided information about which questions each student got right or wrong. This information could help the instructor identify students' strengths and weaknesses and gain insight into making future teaching plans. Students can also use this information to identify their strengths and weaknesses in reading and writing skills, and can be motivated to work harder to improve their English. Students were also able to practice test-taking skills with their tests because we designed this test to be low stakes and have low consequences. Lastly, the practicality of this test can be evaluated differently depending on the viewpoint. From the perspective of the instructor and students, this test is practical. It is a 1-hour in-class test conducted via an online platform. As long as students have a computer and access to the internet, it's convenient for them to take the test. The test results are also provided free of charge. However, from the test developer's point of view, it's very impractical and that requires a lot of time and effort for a one-time test. So here are references, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists? Keylyn. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, so it looks like you had good reliability. You had like more than 0.8. So you noticed that a lot of your students like did not do well in the writing session. Do you think that's because this group of students is better at reading than writing?
Yeah, I think so. Usually in EFL, we put more emphasis on like reading than writing. So yeah, we didn't know that they were not this prepared for writing section. So that was our mistake.
So there's also the possibility that because we put the writing section at the end of the test, that by then they just didn't want to answer it.
Yeah, maybe they ran out of time. That
Yeah.
happens.
I had a question on this. So this test was given to a group of students in Kazakhstan. Was this a required test? So were any grades based off of this, or is this just kind of an extra thing that they were doing?
It was extra thing. So
Do you think
Yeah.
that impacted that completion rate where you had people that said, I just don't want to write, so maybe a 0, or?
yeah, that could be one of the reasons. Yeah. That yeah.
Yeah, originally our response rate was half of what we
Mhm.
have now, which I think was like 16. And the rest of the class only responded after the teacher gently prodded them.
Yeah.
And how well do you think that your test corresponded with what was taught in the class? Were you pretty aware of what the curriculum was and what they had covered at that point?
Not really. It was like diagnostic. So it was like diagnostic and proficiency, but it was not directly related to the curriculum.
Okay. All right. So for our participants, our attendees, Aubrey and Misha, do you have any questions before we wrap this up? If not, that is fine. All right. Well, thank you all very much. This was fantastic. 2 very good presentations, meaningful in our area TESOL. I know assessment is a little bit technical on there. However, for those of you that are attending, if you're looking at grad school, this is what you would go through. It's kind of cool. I mean, you figure what you're able to do with some of this knowledge and creating a more, not to say complicated test, but more quantified, right? More analyzed on there to make sure it is of quality. So that's kind of cool. I want to remind everybody that we do have a plenary speaker coming up at 1 o'clock. The plenary speaker is right in the same area to an extent in language assessment. This is a language assessment creator and works for ACTFL, which is the Association of Foreign Language Teachers. ACTFL is really the company that created the scales to an extent, right? They also have their descriptors for A1s, A2s, B1s, B2s, all those types of things. So we have an assessment expert for language, so it would be very beneficial to attend if you are available at 1. Oh, anonymous attendee. Do you think the results would have been different if students had been more motivated by way of grade, or if the teacher had prodded more insistently in the beginning, especially in regards to writing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If they were able to get some extra credit, they wouldn't write anything. But yeah, because we got a lot of like empty answer sheet. Yeah, definitely.
That ties in with Keylyn's presentation of maybe there needed to be an external motivator on there to get them to do it, right?
And that's what I was thinking when she was talking about that.
Yeah, they may not have been intrinsically motivated to complete the assessment. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and hope to see you during the the plenary speaker. So that is a wrap for this session. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. And I will stop recording.
Thank you.